How had it happened? Just 5 minutes ago, a normal PE class was taking place. But then it came. I didn't see where it came from. Seemingly out of nowhere, a blinding light filled the gymnasium, shortly followed by an ear-piercing buzz. It came upon everyone simultaneously, like a blanket had been thrown over all our senses. The sensation was so overwhelming, it brought me to my knees. In its final few seconds, the buzz grew stronger. The light shone brighter. Its intensity drove it from white to dark yellow. At this point, I was reeling in pain on the floor. My eardrums felt like they were about to explode, and my eyes were burning. My throat was raw from screaming, but the high-pitched buzz drowned out all other noise. I could feel my body being dragged towards something. I couldn't see, but something else was pulling me back. The forces were now viciously trying to take a hold of me. My body was violently being dragged back and forth along the gym floor. It began to get faster and more intense, until my body was practically vibrating. My head was throbbing harder than my heart, and my back felt like it had been pressed up against the grindstone, the flesh slowly being burnt off. I could feel an agonizing pain in my arms and legs. It felt like my muscles were being ripped apart, and my bones were grinding against my flesh. My chest felt like it was closing in on itself, as if every bone in my ribcage was piercing my lungs. Just as the pain had peaked, the buzz reached its loudest and the light its brightest. The pain seemed to intensify greatly and then explode outwards, dissipating immediately. I felt like I was floating, free of all pain and worry. As slowly my senses came back to me and the images of the gym ceiling re-emerged. I slowly lifted myself from the ground. My back was still numb after the pain. In fact, as I got to my feet, I couldn't feel any part of my body. As my eyes began to focus, I saw, in front of me, 3 puddles of blood, just under the basketball net. Where did this blood come from? I thought to myself, creeped out and confused. Something wasn't right. And then, behind me, I heard it. A low gurgling echoed through the gym. It sounded oddly like a washed-up fish choking on the last bit of water it had. Nevertheless, it made me sick to my stomach. But this noise had nothing on the sight I was about to turn around and see. Where once my classmates stood remained nothing but small puddles of blood. It didn't take me long to find out where they went, as towering over me in the center of the room was what I can only describe as a creature straight from hell. I was staring at my peers, all clumped together in a giant mess of gore, blood, and bone. I could still recognize some of the faces swinging from the sides of the creature. 90% of this creature consisted of my dead class, all clumped together in a vile mess of gore. But this creature also had a large hand, which resembled that of a porcelain doll protruding out of its front. It used this arm to slowly drag itself towards me. My nostrils filled with the stench of death as the thing slowly dragged itself towards me. My nostrils burned as they filled with the creature's stench. My eyes watered at the sight of it. I was just about to keep myself from throwing up until I heard the wretched sound its body made as it dragged itself across the floor. I keeled over and vomited my guts out. It kept getting closer, and with no sign of letting up, it was blocking the main exit of the gym. However, there was enough room between it and the walls to slide past it if I was quick. I took in a deep breath of air and readied myself to sprint the fastest I'd ever have to sprint. I focused all my energy on that gap between the gym wall and the creature, and took off. I closed my eyes as I ran past it, afraid of what I might find if I looked too close. Bad idea. I felt like I was traveling at the speed of sound as I bolted through the gap, my knees buckling and my lungs burning. All was going well until my foot slipped up on one of the various puddles of blood. I completely lost my footing and my whole body flew upwards into the air, landing hard on my left leg. As I crashed into the ground, I heard a worrying crack. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my left knee and down to my foot. I grimaced in pain. I had broken my leg. I couldn't feel the lower part of my body. The shock had paralyzed me. I tracked myself onto my rear and looked up to see the creature slowly beginning to turn itself around. I flipped over onto my back and desperately began crawling towards the exit. As I did, I heard the squelching, grueling noises of the creature gaining on me. My energy was draining fast, and the pain in my leg was only growing stronger. My arms were growing weak, and the creature was right behind me, its stench wrapped around me like a blanket. In a pitiful attempt to survive, I crawled under a bench in a fetal position, accepting my fate of being consumed by that thing. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, until the stench grew fainter, and the stomach-churning noises faded. I peered out over the bench and saw that the creature had slid right past me, almost as if it was disinterested. The porcelain-type hand suddenly went rigid and began crawling almost spider-like with incredible speed toward the exit of the gym. It rammed against the wall with immense speed, bringing the whole wall down. The ground began to vibrate and tremble as the wall came crashing down. I clutched my ears, shielding them from the intense ringing as debris fell all around me. As the creature left the building, I expected to hear the screams of students, teachers, and anyone else who may have found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was surreal. The only noise that could be heard was the creature dragging itself along the ground, growing more distant every second. Where was everybody? I used part of the crumbling wall to hoist myself onto my feet, balancing on my good foot. I managed to hop over to the window just across from the gym, grabbing hold of the window sill just seconds before I would have plunged to the ground. The window was opened just slightly to let the breeze in. I was trying to slide my fingers under it when I heard something just around the corner. It sounded like a mixture of the pitter-patter a dog makes when trotting and the sludging the creature from the gym was making. Shit, I said aloud, too lost in fear to realize the mistake I made. Whatever was behind the corner started moving faster. I desperately tried lifting the window with one hand, pulling as hard as I could. It was too heavy. I was already wobbling with one hand firmly on the sill. If I took it off, I'd risk compromising my balance completely. There was no other way. I had to use my second hand if I didn't want to suffer the fate of all my other classmates. I balanced all my weight on my right foot and lifted my hand. Before I could even catch the window with my other hand, my hand slipped and I fell to the ground. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for when the creature attacked. But all I heard was a loud bark. I opened my eyes and slowly lowered my hands to see Sully, the janitor's golden lab, peeking out at me from around the corner. I smiled and took a sigh of relief. It felt like the weight of the world had slid off my shoulders. I whistled at Sully, signaling him to come over. That's when his full body was revealed. As he moved forward, a sludging sound followed. I was only half right in saying that it was silly what appeared around the corner. Because Sully ended after his front two paws. The rest of him was a monstrosity. The rest of Sully past his front paws was a ball of gore, similar to the gym creature. But this ball of gore consisted of the janitor, multiple students, some birds, and rabbits. Speechless, too shocked to even scream, I hauled myself up onto the windowsill. Using my built-up adrenaline, I yanked the top window open, almost ripping it off its hinges and climbed through. I collapsed down onto the floor of the nurse's office, hitting the cold blue tiles hard. I searched the small room up and down until I found what I was looking for. A pair of crutches. I then began rummaging through the medicine cabinet in search for some painkillers. I knocked down all different types of medicine in my frantic search, wobbling on one leg as bottles of cough syrup and aspirin smashed at my feet. I finally found a tray of painkillers shoved in at the back of the cabinet. I let out a sigh of relief and began hopping my way to the sink. I grabbed a plastic cup from the pile beside the faucet and pulled the handle on the tap. To my surprise, not a drop of water left the tap. I frantically began pulling it back and forward until I eventually gave up and slammed my hand on the counter in frustration. I was going to have to take them dry. Reluctantly, I unscrewed the bottle cap and tipped the pill into my palm. I looked at it for a few seconds, not entirely keen on taking it. I cocked my head back and practically threw it down my throat. I swallowed hard, feeling it scrape its way down my throat and into my stomach. I only took one. My throat was so dry, I thought I'd choke if I took any more. The school was completely deserted. There wasn't a soul inside. Little puddles of blood littered the hallway, and red smear marks led off in different directions. Red smear marks of which I could only imagine came from the gore monsters, like snails leaving trails of slime behind them. Occasionally, I'd hear an occasional gurgle or a monotonous sludging sound as the monsters slid around the building. I steered clear of them. I was confident they weren't interested in me, but I didn't want to take any risks. I left the school only to find the same thing had happened to the entire town. Everyone had vanished. All that was left were little puddles of blood. Houses, shops, businesses and restaurants were all deserted. No one was left except me and those damn gore monsters. I didn't even have the nerve to go home and check if my family are still alive. I don't think I could bear seeing them all crushed up in a ball of gore. These gore monsters consumed every living organism in the town. Everything from people to insects. The biggest one, which I like to refer to as the Flash King, stays within the heart of the town. When I first saw it, I thought I was dead for sure. Unlike the others, this one had two porcelain-like arms sticking out of it, was over 15 meters in height, and was made up of all the shit you could ever imagine. Its back was covered in dead birds, like a magnet in its back had sucked them out of the sky. Its body was made mostly of large animals like deer, cattle, dogs, and people. But it, like the rest of them, was disinterested. It rattled the buildings around it as it trudged by me, and its low gurgling sent vibrations through the ground. It's now been 7 days since the disaster. I stopped going outside. I hauled everything I could from the local supermarket into a small house on the edge of town and set up camp. My leg hurts like hell and is bruised all the way down to the ankle. The only thing keeping the pain at bay are the painkillers, and they ran out a few days ago. I stopped going outside because there was nothing to go outside to. Seeing those gore monsters lurking around, recognizing people in them was really taking a toll on my mental health. The loneliness doesn't help either. I'm going insane from loneliness. Seeing those monsters will probably drive me off the edge. All this downtime has only left me with questions that will probably never get answered. Why didn't I get crushed into a gore monster? Am I the only one left? Why did this happen? Who did it? What did it? Two major things have happened since the disaster. On the 4th day, I was making my way to the pharmacy for more painkillers when I heard a loud rumbling coming from above me. It was a helicopter. A military helicopter. It came closer and closer, until I realized it was landing just a few streets away. I hopped as fast as I could to the old boutique and climbed through the broken window. I hid underneath the window for a while until I heard footsteps coming my way. I don't know why I decided to hide, but something just seemed off about the situation. I almost shrugged off that feeling and almost jumped up to yell for help when I heard one of the soldiers say, "You know the orders. Kill anything that moves. We can't let the infected spread outside the perimeter." My heart began racing. I shrunk down as low as I could to the floor, feeling a sharp pain in my back, as little bits of broken glass dug into it. I heard the rattle of metal and heavy footsteps as the soldiers began walking towards the shop. Why are they coming this way? I thought in a cold sweat. My question was soon answered when one of them stated, "I'm picking up a heat signal from that building." I closed my eyes and braced myself for the end. After the traumatic few days I had just gone through, I was almost ready for it. I waited and waited, my heart in my mouth, and my entire body trembling as the soldiers drew closer. They were opening the door when a strange gurgling noise sounded out from the back of the shop. "What the hell was that?" One of the soldiers grunted, aiming his rifle at the source of the noise. They were in the shop now, just a few feet off to my right. They hadn't noticed me yet. Both of them were distracted by the noise and had their guns trained on the counter at the back left corner. I stayed as still and as quiet as I could, holding my breath in anticipation, scared that even blinking would alert the soldiers to my presence. Suddenly, one of them shouted, "We know you're there." The other soldier followed up with, "Identify yourself." This sudden outburst of noise almost made me jump out of my skin. A sickly trudging sound could be heard as the gore creature began to crawl over the counter. As it finished its ascension over the counter, the two soldiers screamed, "Holy shit!" in unison. Shoot it!" One of the soldiers screamed, his voice cracking and breaking uncontrollably. The two started to empty rounds into the monster. I clenched my ears at the deafening sound of the rifles. Despite their efforts, the creature continued its pursuit towards them. As the creature grew nearer, the two men fell to the floor and began shrieking in agony as their bodies began to violently vibrate. That is when I got to see firsthand how the gore creatures consumed their prey. It was the strangest and most blood-curdling thing I've ever witnessed. It was almost otherworldly. In a completely silent manner, their bodies began to explode in slow motion. When I say slow motion, I mean I could literally see every strip of tissue get separated from their bones, every vein and tendon get peeled off their muscles. I saw their rib cages get dismantled, their eyeballs float out of their skulls, and their organs getting separated bit by bit. When this process of separation was over, when there was just two piles of guts, bones, skin, muscle, and organs suspended in mid-air, it all began to move slowly, almost magnetically towards the creature. Suddenly, when they got to about a foot away from the creature, time returned to normal, and within the blink of an eye, they merged with the creature. I lay there in shock for a solid 10 minutes as the gore creature trudged past me and out the door. After the shock had subsided, I grabbed my crutches and began hopping as fast as I could out the back way of the shop. I could hear gunshots go off in the distance as I made my way through the back streets back to the house I was occupying. More soldiers had obviously come into contact with the gore monsters. When I got back to the house, I heard all sorts of strange noises in the distance. Noises like helicopters and truck engines, people shouting, and the occasional gunfire. I climbed up the stairs and into the guest bedroom. Looking out the window in the distance, just a bit down the country road, I could make out what looked like a military base. I was too far away to see what was going on, but I spent the whole night watching it like a hawk. After all, the only other things I could do was eat, sleep, and worry about the constant ache in my broken leg. The next day, I went back into town to see if I could find any sort of medicine for my leg. The pain had become so unbearable, I almost welcomed the thought of being shot dead by military personnel. But the only other debatable living things I came into contact with were the gore creatures. I entered the now abandoned pharmacy and began rummaging through their stock. I filled the plastic bag that I found floating around outside with as much painkillers and sedatives as I could carry. On the way out, I noticed something. On a rack near the door lay a pair of binoculars. Thinking of the military base, I grabbed them and managed to squeeze them into the bag. The journey home was just as lifeless as the way in. When I got home, I ate a meal of canned peaches, boiled rice, the last of my food, and hid it upstairs into my room. I drowned more painkillers than I most likely should have, and followed it up with a large dose of sedatives. The sedatives kicked in almost immediately, and I entered into a deep sleep. As I sank into the bed, my sleep was plagued with fever dreams and did little to ease the pain in my leg. Neither did the painkillers. I slept for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality, I was only out for about a day. I was awoken by the deafening sound of explosions and gunfire. I jumped out of the bed. Forgetting my leg was broken, I attempted to stand. I winced in pain as I put weight on my leg. I managed to grab my crutches before I collapsed. I grabbed the binoculars off the dresser and threw myself at the window. I quickly fiddled with the handle and opened it. I stuck my head out and pressed the binoculars against my eyes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. In the distance, the Flash King was making its way towards the military base. Something was happening to the Flash King. I scanned the area and slowly began realizing what was going on. The gore monsters were merging with the Flash King, and slowly, the creature began to take shape. Two gore monsters with large porcelain-like legs attached to them squished themselves under the Flash King and lifted it off the ground. Then, two other gore monsters with large porcelain-like arms attached to them dragged their way towards the Flash King. I recognized one of them. It was the one from the gym. They crawled onto the Flash King's back and squished into its shoulders. The Headless King now began walking on its new feet towards the military base. It was uncanny seeing this giant, gory, doll-like creature in real life. The military were unloading everything they had into the Flash King. Tanks, choppers, rocket launchers, rifles, fire. And in the distance, I could see reinforcements transporting missiles up towards the battlefield. But to no avail. The Flash King was just absorbing everything they threw at it. I knew what was coming. There was only one outcome of this fight. And sure enough, its effects only lasted seconds. In one move, the Flash King had absorbed every single organism in that base. There was a deafening silence as I regained my senses and raised the binoculars to my eyes. The Flash King was now walking through the base, crushing everything in its path. I waited a few hours before deciding to go down there to check out the damage and see if I could find some food. The Flash King had left an ankle-deep river of blood behind it. The grounds of the base were covered in spent ammo and puddles of blood where soldiers once stood. Most of the buildings were crushed by the Flash King, but one row of tents remained. In that tent, I found a computer with internet access. This is how I'm recording this. By the time you hear this, an epidemic will have begun. I can see the smaller gore monsters making their way out of town, following the Flash King. This is a warning. Escape the US while you still can. But I fear that it's only a matter of time before it spreads overseas. This epidemic will bring humanity to its knees. I just hope I'm not the only one who's immune.